channel. It's been a minute since I recorded a video. Been busy. A lot of other things going on related to my other business, Exclusive Innovation Incubator. First of all, thanks for coming back. Please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. This is going to be a quick video going over the code that I've written in support of this blog post that you see here that's on Dev 2, called Using ReactFire with Ionic Framework and Capacitor. I was motivated by this by a guy who does a lot of great talks on Firebase called David East. He has a video that introduces you to ReactFire. Once again, a heads up, ReactFire is not considered production, but I have integrated it into an Ionic Framework app using a bunch of different components. Let's see, where's my source code? Let's scroll down and get to the source code. So I talk about what I use. So let's see. If we go to my source code here, once again, there's your big warning. I use React Hooked Form. I think it's cool stuff. You should definitely check it out. It makes your forms a lot easier and not a lot of use states all over the place. What have I done so far? Where's the list of things? Oh, here we are at the bottom. So I have shown a great example of how to use Ionic modal, where I capture data in the modal and bring it back to the parent class to add to the database. I've added the ability to create account. There's always been the ability to list items and to, what's the other one? List items and actually create items. A couple of other things I did, which is interesting, which I think is helpful in examples. I'm really starting to use TypeScript now appropriately in my examples instead of just throwing any's all over the place. In the beginning I did it because I thought it was just a lot easier for people to wrap their head around it, but I'm beginning to see that there's definitely value in slowly starting to drink the Kool-Aid and buy into TypeScript and use TypeScript. Don't get me wrong, I've been slinging code for quite a bit. In fact, I started with Java, and so I'm used to types and all that stuff. I just gotten away from it for a while. But I think it's something great for people to learn to help them with their development, especially as you get on larger projects. So those of you who watch my content, you'll see I'm starting to introduce it more and more as we go along. All right, you're here for the code, so let's hop to the code. I am just going to highlight the kind of challenging things or things that might not make sense as you're reading through it. I'm also, another new thing I'm trying to do, which is kind of, it's sad that I'm saying it's a new thing, is I'm trying to actually start, here's a bad example. I'm trying to actually start adding comments to my code so you can see what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Hopefully that will be a little bit more helpful. This home is probably a better example of it. There's almost as many comments as there are code, but I think it's just helpful. So let's get to the app for those of you who've tolerated me rambling on this long. So here's my app. The basic code you expect to see. You have a login screen. You have the ability to create the account screen. You get the animations that's going along. Let's go back to my login screen. I believe my login is test. So T-E-S-T. What is it? Testmail.com and password ASSWRD and login. All right, ignore that. So we have our basic list item here. We got some stuff. I've created this add something modal, which pops up. So you get the appropriate alerts, which I've integrated. You get the animation. It's kind of fast in my humble opinion, but you can see what it is. If I add some content, this is meaningless content. But we save the information. I put an alert in here so you can see the data coming back from React Hooked Form. And we close. I show an alert, and you can see the data is getting saved. This data can be anything you want. It's really just showing you how to use React Hooked Form and how to use ReactFire's hooks. And then you can log out, and then it brings you back to the appropriate screen. So let's jump into the code. So one of the things that I see a lot of people spending a lot of time, banging their head around is how the hell do I get routing to work properly, especially with authentication. One of the cool things you get with ReactFire is you get this really cool auth check component. So it makes it real simple. On the auth check, if the auth check fails, tell it what you want it to render. If it's successful, tell it what you want it to render. So a trick that I've done to kind of clean up this whole app is I've said, if my auth check fails, render a set of routes that are public. If my auth check is successful, render a set of routes that are private. So what this allows me to do is simplify what you see here. It's real simple. Good, show public. Bad, show private. So, or is that reversed? So what I've done here, this is important, make sure you wrap each set of routes with Ionic router outlet, or else you won't get to nice animations. But basically what I'm saying here is if it's a private route, i.e. I don't have an authenticated user, then just render. You only have two things you can do. You can see the home path, that's it. And if it's some other bizarre thing, excuse me, if you're on a website where someone can bang something crazy into the path, the default route will still be to render the home page. If it's a private, so basically if I don't have authentication, then there's a couple of routes. You can access the login route, which will show you the login component, and you can access the create account route, which can show you create account, and then default just redirects you back to login. So if I hadn't done it this way, I've seen a couple of other people who they use this private route component, which causes a bunch of interesting things. And I've seen other people with a bunch of ternary expressions inside their router. I think this is just a lot cleaner. It's my opinion. Feel free to leave your opinion in the comments if you like. Certain people have tons of opinions on them. So let's just hop into the Firebase thing. Firebase, let me go over here to show you. Make sure I show you the document. The link's included in the video, but here's ReactFire. So you can check it out, see what's happening here. You see it says the status is experimental, so beware. So here we have our provider. We pass it our Firebase configuration, which I have hidden over here in my NVS, but it's the basic configuration information you can copy from your project. I just have embedded it there. This provider wraps my whole application, so it gives me access to a bunch of hooks that I need. It also provides this auth check component, which I mentioned before, which handles that whole crap that you had to deal with normally of subscribing to see, do I have a user, do I not have a user, and take the appropriate action. This is way simpler. So it does a check, as I said. If I ain't got it, public. If I got it, it goes to private. So that's what's going on here. So that is that is my app. That is my app TS. Next, let's move on to the login page, which people find relatively entertaining and interesting. So we go to my login page. I'm not going to talk about React Forms because I've talked about it in a bunch of different other blogs and videos, so please check those out. But just to show over, let's hop to the Firebase stuff, and then we'll talk about the Ionic specific stuff. So one of the things you notice right at the top here is there's this crazy ass bug that exists with ReactFire that sometimes it caches authentication information. So what I do is whenever you come to the login page, I found this code, click this link here, you can see the bug that explains it way better than I can. I just go in and clean up any shit that might be left over to make sure that there's no user information anywhere so it can log you in appropriately. So that's what this code here is for. I'm using the use history hook to get the hook. I'm doing some state management here to show or hide the error alert if an error occurs when you're attempting to log in. As I said, I'm not going to go to use form stuff, so I talk about it a lot in other blog posts. Please check them out. But here we have the use auth. This is an example of one of the hooks you get access to with Firebase, and it basically just gives you the authentication information. You need that authentication object to do the login. Those of you who've used Firebase before, this should look very familiar to you. That's what's amazing about this. You just use this use auth hook. You get access to this object. You make the calls you want. In a later video, I'm going to wrap all the Firebase stuff, even at a deeper level, into a separate context, so we can manage reading and writing from the collection without making the API calls directly inside of our components. We'll wrap it in another hook. Just as an example, once again, to show you the power of using context as an alternative to other forms of state management. So we have our basic sign-in, nothing crazy here to see. If you authenticate and your authentication is successful, then replace the route with the home route, and then now we render the home page. Like I said, the login is pretty straightforward. Here's an Ion alert object, which should be familiar to everyone. Down here we have our form. This is a React hook form. I guess I got to touch on it a little bit since it's all here. So what it does is this will handle my validation, and it'll package up all of my named items in my form in a nice little object that I can use to submit. It will handle the validation, and it will track any errors, so I can use the error tracking to I've written this little component which I'll touch on, which will render an error message if this is invalid. I can also check and see just any errors to disable the login button. But like I said, check out the React Hook form video for more on that. So we capture email address, we capture a password using ReactForm, and then we have our buttons. Here's our history push to create account. But on submit, ReactForm has this pretty cool thing called handle submit, which is doing all the validation and all the other magical things. But if it is successful and there's no errors, it calls the function that you provide. The function I provide is called sign in. And as you can see up here in sign in, I'm just logging out the data, and I'm calling the authenticate. Oh, excuse me, I'm calling sign in with email and password, so we get signed in successfully. Then if there's an error, I've created this function called show alert. Actually, I didn't create the function. It's just basically state management. So set show alert. When I set show alert to a value, then my Ion alert knows that my show alert is not empty, so that means I have an error to display. So it's open, results to true, so it renders it, and then my message is right here in the show alert. So you see what the error message is that got returned here when the exception is thrown. So that is login. So now let's assume my login is successful. So now I'm on my home page, and so that is this state. Ooh. Let me get back to it. dest@mail.com. And now let's log in. So now we're logged in. So this is my home page. Let's walk through this. Once again, the use auth I mentioned before, use history. This gets us access to the history. So for the old React heads, where normally you have to do this wrap with router to get access to the history, you can use this cool hook called use history to get it. ReactFire hook, so you get this use Firebase app hook, which gets you access to the Firebase app, and then based on that you get the Firestore, then based on that you get the collection, and then now I have a reference to the collection. And then there's another hook called use Firestore collection data. And this one's very cool because all you do is give it the reference and it gets the data. So I make this call, it's going to query and pull all the objects back that are associated with the things ref, and it's inside of data. And now that I have it in data, these are just some other variables that I need to determine show the modal when you want to add something, which I'll touch on later. And then here's if there's any errors that show up. So I'll just jump down to the rendering it. So now I have some data. And then inside of here, my data, I map through my data, and I get my objects, and then I take the ID, I use it as a key, I take right now I'm just taking the whole piece of data, which you can see that's right here, and I'm just doing a JSON stringify, so it renders it all. A couple of magic things that I do here, so you know, is this little guy here says, whatever the ID field is in the collection, add a field to the data object that are the data objects that are returned called ID, and put the ID in there. That's how I get the ID back with my object, even though I don't save the ID with the object. What else we got going on here? I see a bunch of folks talking about how the hell do I show modals and show alerts, and the magic really is in the use state. It's real, I hate saying it's real simple. It's straight, well, no, it's not straightforward. So here's how you do it. You basically, if you create this use state object, this use state, you have a variable, show modal, and you have a way to set its value. Down here, I do something a little bit more interesting. I have this show error alert variable and set show error alert, and as you see, the specific type I have associated with it. And if you go up and you look at the type, it's because I have a bunch of other information that I want to associate with the alert. So I have a string, I have a subheader, and a message, so you can control how the alert looks without creating a bunch of other use states. I've seen articles about the pros and cons of this approach. I think for this simple example, it's sufficient. So what I do is when I call set show errors, you can see right here, I have a function that has the string, the message that I want associated, and then I use this is error flag, which I don't know why. Oh yes, because based on the error, if you say it's an error, I change the subheader. I wanted to do some CSS things and some icons based on if it's an error or not, but that's why that's passed in. And then the alert here, basically what it does is it says, here's my alert. If I have a value and show I on alert, then show me this alert. And then what I do is I take the values or the properties off of the show alert object and I use it to render the data appropriately in the alert instead of having multiple alerts and a bunch of other stuff. This is something that I've done. I think somewhere else in the code I've actually wrapped this into a function to make it cleaner, but that's what you do with the alert. If you look at the modal, it's a very similar thing also. So when I click on add something here, there you go, and I want to enter this data. Let's take a look at the modal. Add something modal. So this is just another Ionic component. It's got all your normal page stuff in it. What I did was I created this my Ion text item where I wrapped all that controller code and all that other code that you saw that was required for so all this controller render, this input type, this name, these rules, all this stuff is just wrapped. And also the rendering of an error that's associated, I've wrapped it in this my Ion text type. And so what you see is in here, where is it? My add something modal, I can just cleanly just create this simple object here, and it will render it appropriately. It handles the data entry and the validation and the rendering of the error message. So it's just a component that I put in here to kind of simplify this. So I have a component for each one of the fields. You enter fields, and then on the save, that's kind of what I really want to talk about. So on the save, what I do is, if you cancel, I close the modal and set a flag called has data to false. On submit, where's my save podcast? It's a save podcast. So the save podcast information says it's of type submit. When I click that, it will call a function that's associated with the form at the top. And you can see my form says on submit, if React.form found no errors, then call the method add the thing. So let's go to add the thing. Where's add the thing? So here we are on add the thing. So what I'm doing is I'm not modifying the data store inside of my modal component, but what I'm doing is I'm passing the data back up to its parent. So if I get this call here, I have the data, has data is true, and I pass the data to my onClose modal, which is a function that was passed in from my parent. So I'm calling this function from my parent and passing it back the data. So let's go back up to the parent. I come up to my home dude, and you can see here where I have my modal and my onClose modal. So now I get the data back. This is an example where I'm using the type. I'm using my modal response type, which is the data that from these forms that I need, and the flag to determine if I actually have data, and then I call my add something function with that response. So let's go to my add something. So in my add something, first thing I do is set show modal false to hide my modal, and I check to see if I have data, which was passed back to me from my modal, saying yes or no. I do have data. And then I use my trusty Firebase hook again. Here it is. Use Firebase. And actually, I have the ref already from before. So I take the ref and I say, all right, ref, give me a doc. And since there's no ID assigned, it will create a unique identifier. Then I take all of the response data and say that's what I want you to pass in. And then, if it's successful, I show my success alert. If it's not successful, I take my error message and I pass that and I throw my error up. And if the user hit cancel, I show my error again and I say the user canceled. So these are all the different ways I can use that one error component based on the data that I passed in based on using useState. So that's what I've done there. What else is interesting that I can show you? I think that's the bulk of it. I showed you my interesting Ionic text component. I showed you my error display. I showed you how I add something. Let's quickly take a look at create account. Create account is still, it's pretty straightforward. Like the other ones, it is. Where is it? I create a form. Same old thing. Form. Email, password. And then on submit, type submit. On submit, we come up and call my form function, which is handle submit, create new user, and create new users just like the other function we saw. We get the data passed in, we have the auth object from my hook, we call the Firebase function we all know and love, and then we replace and go. I think that's the bulk of it. Like I said, this was really just to kind of walk you through the code and hear my voice and explain it. So I hope you enjoyed this. All of this code is checked in and committed. Please check out the blog post. I try my best to answer my questions. So here's the YouTube channel where everything is. As I said, I try to be pretty responsive. If you take a look, we had some folks who were struggling with some of the work I did, and I spent quite a bit of time over the weekend kind of going back and forth with them to kind of help them work through their issues that they were having. So feel free to check out the code that I have here on my channel. And if you have any questions about that, post a question here and I'll be happy to answer the question for you. As I said, let me see, where is my dev 2? Hold on. This is me and my dev 2. Let's see. Here's the story, ReactFire with Ionic framework. Feel free to post some comments down below if you have questions here, or another thing is to just go directly to the GitHub repo and open an issue on the GitHub repo and ask a question if you have. Once again, thanks for stopping by. As usual, feel free to leave comments below if there's something you want to hear me talk about or some sample code you want to see. And make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you read my blog post. And thanks for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Talk to you later. Bye.